Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for December 3rd, 2021. And if you were thinking, hey, Bolden, where the heck were you with the show on Wednesday? You didn't have one. Well, I tried, actually. And I guess I'm calling do-over because I tried to do the episode. I did a live stream on Wednesday morning, and I had some technical issues. The audio was way off. I checked out the archived edition that I had recorded locally, and that was messed up. I think I've got everything resolved. Let me know in the comments if the audio sounds good on the live stream. And, I was going to actually try to re-record it and post it as a podcast edition later in the day, but it was my birthday. I decided to take a little time off, hang out, stuff my face a little bit, enjoy a little bit of relaxation. And so here we are with a do-over. Today, I'm talking about government welfare programs. And you'd think with all the stimulus and the logistics problems, supply chain things that are happening with the extended unemployment and emergency funding that we've seen for the last almost 2 years now, that a lot of people would be blaming all this government welfare for many of the problems that we face today. But no. Most people seem totally clueless about the source of the problem and the fact that subsidizing a particular behavior, subsidizing being unemployed, staying at home, makes things far worse. So on this episode, I'm going to briefly point out that the General Welfare Clause of the Constitution does not authorize this, and I'm going to point you to another episode I did on that recently. But I want to focus more on a really great essay that was written originally anonymously by Benjamin Franklin in 1766, where he understood that incentives matter, and when you subsidize things, you get more of it. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is everything you need to follow us. It's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out. There you're going to find all the platforms we're on. We live stream on mainstream ones, YouTube and Facebook and Twitch and Twitter and DLive. We also live stream at Odyssey.com, decentralized, censorship resistant. We upload the archived edition of the videos at all over the place. Ben Swan's Sovereign.media, SOVREN.media, Gab TV, Brighteon, BitChute, BitTube, sometimes MeWe Minds. Everywhere we can find a place to upload the video, Rumble. We also have the audio-only podcast edition all over the place, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, iHeartRadio. Wherever you want us to be, please let me know if we're not there. You can find all the archives of the show on individual episodes. I include links and references so you can read and learn more on your own time, because I'm just scratching the surface. Like, I'm going to have Benjamin Franklin's original writing here that you can, well, the text of it, not the original actual document. And you can also find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month. Again, the show homepage, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. Thank you so much. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this info out to you in the next probably about 15-ish minutes or so. And I want to start out with the new article that we published by Mike Meharry just on Wednesday morning. Benjamin Franklin on doing good to the poor. Of course, that will be linked to in the show notes. He says, the federal government lacks any legitimate constitutional authority to establish welfare programs for the poor. Not only that, the federal welfare system fails in its promise to help the poor out of poverty. So it's a 1-2 punch. On the one hand, people have and I'm going to touch on this a little bit more in just a bit. People say that just because you don't want a centralized government doing something, you must hate poor people. You want them to starve and die in the streets, which is just absurd. And then on the other hand, even if you could make the case that they were authorized to do what they're doing, their results suck. They just don't get things done. He says supporters of the expansive federal welfare system argue that the General Welfare Clause authorizes all this. But that's not a blank check. It doesn't grant blanket authority for the federal government to do anything it decides, and its infinite wisdom is for the general welfare. I love it. The little sarcasm there is awesome. The clause is limited by the delegated powers that follow. A lot of people think that it's just an unlimited power. Here's James Madison describing that setup in Federalist number 41. He says, "For what purpose could the enumeration of particular powers be inserted if these and all others were meant to be included in the preceding general power. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, people claim is basically a reservoir of almost unlimited power. So what would be the point of saying all these other things are delegated if they were already included? That would be superfluous and dumb. Nothing, he said, is more natural nor common than first to use a general phrase and then to explain and qualify it by a recital of particulars. And then I called it dumb, but Madison put it this way. The idea of an enumeration of particulars, which neither explain nor qualify the general meaning and can have no other effect than to confound and mislead, is an absurdity. So the idea that the General Welfare Clause authorizes unlimited power, authorizes all the stuff that's also delegated, is absurd to me, stupid, just wrong. I covered it in some detail. The General Welfare Clause and introduction, just middle of last month. I will link to that episode in the show notes. I think it's a really important one for you to check out. But going forward, here's James Madison. Actually, as a setup, January 1st, 1794, and this is from archive.gov, a petition was read from a committee appointed by the Maryland Assembly to distribute $13,000 in relief raised by private subscription in Baltimore to some 3,000 French refugees from Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, stating that their funds are nearly exhausted and praying the relief and aid of Congress. And they wanted to actually get Congress involved in helping out, funding people after a disaster to help out the poor. But Madison actually had something else to say. Here he is on January 10th of 1794, and this is from the Annals of Congress. Actually, this is from Eliot's Debates. I don't know. I'll link to it in the show notes. I'm not sure what volume, maybe number 4. Mr. Madison remarked that the government of the United States is a definite government, confined to specified objects. It's not like the state governments, whose powers are more general. Charity, he said, is no part of the legislative duty of the government. Here, just straight up, like, we want to be charitable. We human beings want to be charitable and help each other out. That's what is the right, moral, and good thing to do, which I will get to at the very end of the episode as well. But that doesn't mean that government should be doing it. In fact, government shouldn't be doing that if that's the case, if we want to be charitable, because government's going to make it a political thing. They're going to help special interests. They're not going to help based on charity. Charity is no part of the legislative duty of the government, said James Madison. It would puzzle any gentleman to lay his finger on any part of the Constitution which would authorize the government to interpose in the relief of the St. Domingo sufferers. That's January 10th, 1794. Back to Mike Meharry. He put it this way. If you search through the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8, you will find nothing even hinting at congressional authority to establish programs for the poor. That means the power remains with the state governments and the people themselves. Now, the people of each state may determine that they want government. They may think that the only way to deal with things is going to be through government. Now, in another state, they may not. In another state, they may say, well, this is going to be even further devolved locally. This will be on a county or a city-by-city basis. But that's how it's supposed to be under the Constitution. Meharry puts it this way. Many will still argue that the federal government should provide welfare payments despite the constitutional issues. We can't let some abstract political philosophy stop us from helping people, right? After all, government welfare is helping people. And he says, but is it really? And then he goes back and he says, in a 1766 essay, 1766, this is a decade before Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was published, on the price of corn and management of the poor. Originally, the author was cited as orator. It turns out that later on we found out it was Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin persuasively argued that the welfare schemes do more harm than good. And here's how he put it. Let's start it out with this. He says, in my youth, I traveled much, and I observed in different countries that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves, and of course, became poorer. You create a culture of dependency, and then that breeds more of it. And then more people who are kind of on the margins may see that as an easier way out and try to get in that system. It just encourages it. It's kind of like if you're a parent with a 40-year-old kid living at home that you've paid all their bills, you pay for their car repairs, and you buy their food. And if they don't have the motivation to go out and stand on their own, they're going to keep doing that and expanding on that over time. Anyways, back to Benjamin Franklin. On the contrary, the less that was done for them, the more they did for themselves and became richer. Again, that's On the Price of Corn and the Management of the Poor, November 29th, 1766. Back to Meharry said, Franklin noted that there was no country in the world that provided as many provisions for the poor as England, including a solemn general law which made by the rich to subject their own estates to a heavy tax for the support of the poor. In Franklin's view, it did nothing but make that poverty worse. And here's how Franklin put it. He says, under all these obligations, again, he's noting that England was doing more for the poor financially through government than anyone, and it wasn't helping. He noted this all the way, over 200 years ago, and people still in general can't figure it out. Under all these obligations, are our poor modest, humble, and thankful? And do they use their best endeavors to maintain themselves and lighten our shoulders of this burden? On the contrary, I affirm that there is no country in the world in which the poor are more idle, dissolute, drunken, and insolent. The day you passed that act, you took away from them before their eyes the greatest of all inducements to industry, frugality, and sobriety, by giving them a dependence on somewhat else than a careful accumulation during youth and health for support in age or sickness. And we all have this kind of I would like to think that we want to all take a stand for ourselves, but there is something we've been raised from day one, and some of the lucky ones out there were not, that government will take care of you when you get old. Government's got you covered. They've got that Social Security program, and it might be difficult, but they've got your back. And if things get really bad, they've got you on health care. They've got you on basically everything. They're trying to propagandize and train us from cradle to grave. And here's how Franklin summed it up. He said, you offered a premium for the encouragement of idleness, and you should not now wonder that it has had its effect in the increase of poverty. What a surprise. Today, we hear it all the time. I can't understand why people won't go back to work after they were getting paid. So many people were getting paid more to not work than to actually take a job. And so when they were trying to get hired again at $12 or $15 an hour, a lot of people didn't want to take that. And then they wonder, why are there logistics backlogs? Why can't we get products that we need? Why are prices going up due to all the printing and on and on? So here's Benjamin Franklin along these lines saying, here, you did all this, and now you're surprised that it has had bad results? We hear the same kind of surprise today. But again, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the show, here Mike Meharry points out that, well, if you say that government shouldn't do something, you get a lot of people thinking that you're heartless and you don't want to help people at all. In fact, it's the other way around. We want to help people, which is why we want government the hell out of the way. They've got it backwards. Meharry puts it like this. If you argue against government welfare programs, people will automatically accuse you of not caring about poor people. I mean, I chuckle as I say this, but that's what happens all the time. Benjamin Franklin takes on this argument directly, making it clear he's not opposed to helping the poor. He says, I am for doing good to the poor, but I differ in opinion of the means. And then here back to James Madison. Madison was talking about this as well. And he made the case, or he was discussing how it was talked about how the Parliament had actually spent all kinds of money to help people out in a disaster. But he says, as to the American Congress, the case was widely different. He was satisfied that the citizens of the United States possessed an equal degree of magnanimity, generosity, and benevolence with the people of Britain. But this House certainly did not possess an undefined authority correspondent with that of a British Parliament. Madison wished that some other mode could be devised for assisting the French sufferers than by an act of Congress. Straightforward. He's saying, okay, just because they did it over there, this is like a child's argument. Well, the British did it, so why can't we? He's also saying, well, there's reasons that there's limits on power, And if you go beyond those limits, then you just encourage more of that in the future. And it's going to keep happening and happening and happening. We've known about this all through history. That's how things play out. So Madison actually wanted to help people. He just did not want to use the government, an act of Congress, to make it happen. Here back to Benjamin Franklin, he says, I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but by leading or driving them out of it. So that is pretty straightforward. Don't encourage them to stay in the situation that they are, but help them or lead or drive them out of it. Here's Mike Meharry again. He says, government welfare programs effectively subsidize poverty and ultimately make things worse. Incentives matter. When you incentivize people not to work by providing generous benefits, they will be less inclined to work. What a surprise. Many poor people are incentivized into a cycle of poverty and government dependence. That's exactly the way the government likes it. They want us all on our knees economically. They want us to actually have to rely on them all the time in as many situations as possible. If you remember the great V film, V for Vendetta, there was a scene where, people were getting a little uppity and the chancellor said, we need to remind these people why they need us. And that's what they're always doing to us today. And Mike closes it out with this. After decades of federal spending, poverty rates remain virtually unchanged. So decades and decades of all this welfare, and they are not changing things at all. They're just creating a permanent dependency class. Meanwhile, and they're destroying the purchasing power of everyone else. They're actually lowering the standard of living for everyone to make no change or virtually no change in poverty rates. Meanwhile, he says the government has created a permanent underclass dependent on government handouts. We should have a different approach. It's not through government. Benjamin Franklin says he wants to help the poor, not through government. James Madison, I want to help these people out, but not through an act of Congress. Here's Thomas Jefferson as president writing to William Rogers, March 2nd, 1806. You wouldn't hear a president writing things like this today. They're always asking for spending and lower interest rates and more printing and stimulus and sending out checks and putting their name on it so everyone knows why we need them and why they're so good for us and who we need to go out and support. But Thomas Jefferson had a different approach. He says, I deem it the duty of every man to devote a certain proportion of his income for charitable purposes, and that it is his further duty to see it so applied as to do the most good of which it is capable. And I think that's something that we can wrap it up with today. I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it was entertaining. I apologize for missing the show or trying to do the show, but not having the archives available on Wednesday. But I should be back on track. Hopefully everything's good here today. Of course, if you support what we're doing, you like this episode, you like our work at the TAC, please consider a membership for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. No pressure on that, but if you've got the financial means, I'd be very grateful for any support that you can give us today. And of course, free and easy peasy, you can smash the like button, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, share links to the episode, whatever platform or on our website, leave comments, subscribe, get notifications, all that stuff will help trigger algorithms where applicable and tell platforms to show the program to more people. Again, I can't thank you enough for spending some of your time with me today. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.